Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 98. We're going to be talking about Titane, the Julia Ducornau film from 2021. And to help us do so, we have a guest, Monique Jenkinson, a.k.a. Fauxnique.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Oh, yes. Before we get into it, Monique has something to plug. Monique, tell us about what's new in your world.
OMG, you guys, I wrote a book.
You did.
My book is called Faux Queen, A Life in Drag. And I like to describe it as a collection of essays in drag as a memoir about how someone like me became a pageant-winning drag queen and the twisty and windy road to take me to that place and all around. A friend of mine recently described it as a kind of daisy, that it keeps coming back to the center, but it kind of meanders around in nice little petal-like formations. And my friend and idol, Justin Vivian Bond, called me the Jane Goodall of drag.
That's the best blurb, I think.
Yeah,
It's the
perfect.
best.
And that's on Amble Press.
It's out on, thank you.
And I will give a little extra plug. Your book just came out a few days ago, but it's already in its third printing. So some people are having a hard time actually getting their hands on it.
It's back ordered. They a little bit underestimated the desire. But I will be also having a series of book events, the first of which is the original release party at Oasis on February 19th from 6 to 9 p.m. Readings, a drag show, and of course, a book signing. So come. That's going to be co-produced by City Lights Books, Oasis, and Amble Press.
I'll be there.
I might too.
You should totally come out.
Oh my God, that would be amazing.
All right. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org, WHATTHE. And I just want to map out the next few episodes because some of them involve listener input. Mm-hmm. Our next episode is going to be a self-help for nihilists post-quarantine Q&A. We did a quarantine Q&A at the beginning of all of this mishigas, and now we're going to do a post-quarantine Q&A since it's all over. So do email us in or hit up the Instagram account. You can skip Facebook. Or just, if you bump into us, one of us on the street, ask a question, send us a text, whatever.
That's certainly not going to happen with me.
Yeah, it's already happening with me. I've already got a couple of questions in.
No, I mean bumping into it on the street.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. The next episode is going to be Scary Thoughts episode number 100. And that is going to be titled, What Have We Learned? And I think we haven't quite figured out what that's going to be. It's going to be like a meta episode.
Yeah, it'll be a reflection on our bromance, our unlikely bromance.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good. And then episode 101, I kind of wanted to prepare our listeners for. It's something that I've been sort of working on for like 3 years, I think. I've been threatening to do this episode about recursive horror, looking at Happy Death Day, Triangle, Russian Dolls, and then outside of horror cinema, there's Groundhog Day, obviously.
That's the best example of what the recursive part is.
Yeah. But there's a lot in horror cinema and literature that is these sort of time loops, and I've been working on articulating an idea about this, and I figure episode 101, it's a palindrome. It's time to do a loop.
Time is a flat circle, bro.
Yeah.
That's a great name for something.
Time is a flat circle, bro.
Yeah. Can we put that on a t-shirt, please?
Done. Anything else other than spoilers ahead for Titane? Anybody? Got to cover anything? Okay, great. Let's get to it. Where do we want to start?
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of wow.
This was my favorite film of last year.
Yeah?
And I think the best horror movie of like the last 5 years. And one of the only films I saw in the theater in the last 2 years.
Jesus.
Yeah. Like, I love Julia Ducornau. Like, I think she's great.
Yeah.
And so I will show up to whatever she does forever.
Mo, what was your first impression? What's your...
Well, I loved Raw.
Yep.
I kind of wish I had watched it again before this, but this movie, I can't say that I loved it, but it did the thing that I love when art does, which is I came out of it going, what did I love that or hate that? And what the fuck was that? And I didn't know, and I still don't know. And I love it when art does that, even if it's art that I don't love or don't know if I love it or hate it. And it just creates its own world and its own kind of mode. And I think I'm just all, especially right now, I'm just all for strange art that does something that we rarely see. And I'm often, I'll be put off by something. There's a lot of art that I'm really glad it's in the world, but I don't love it. And this might fall into that category.
Carrot Top.
What?
Carrot Top.
For sure.
I'm thinking Paul McCarthy. I'm thinking
Anything where a mess is made.
Right. I mean, visual art where a mess is made for sure. I hate. I like art about cleaning up and movies about cleaning up. But also, Paul McCarthy, Dennis Cooper, these are artists who, and especially if you kind of interrogate behind the work, there's always something else going on behind the work that you might be deeply disturbed by or disgusted by.
I saw a piece of art that I really liked that was cleaning up and making a mess. It was this robot arm that cleaned up oil that was coming out of its own body. And it just keeps going over and over again until a few years from now when it just runs out of the oil and dies.
That's rad and really, really appropriate to this film.
Yeah.
What was the baby doll from the 70s that pooped its diaper for you?
Baby Alive.
Baby Alive. So that's like a Baby Alive.
It's like the baby at the end of this film.
It's
like the T800 version of Baby Alive.
This movie is totally cyborg Baby Alive.
So I guess between the three of us, we have all sides of opinion about this movie because I really didn't like this movie. I mean, I similarly, we covered Raw. Mm-hmm. I guess that was her first feature film?
Feature, yeah.
We all loved it pretty unreservedly. And I was very excited about this movie and very disappointed by this movie. I don't know that there's much to say about me disliking it. I think that's not necessarily an interesting discussion, but I was not into having to watch it a second time to do this episode, I have to say. I wasn't quite dragged kicking and screaming to cover this, but was not quite excited to do so.
Huh, weird.
Did you like it less on second watching or the same?
I think I liked it less, but that had more to do with me already not wanting to watch it than it's not like I uncovered more things I disliked. It was more being put through something that I was not invested in, that I already knew I wasn't invested in.
I liked the second half a lot more than I liked. Like when I first saw it, I thought the first half was better than the second half. But when I watched it again, the very sweet relationship between her and her fireman dad,
her fake daddy.
Yeah, I thought it was just much sweeter on second watching. And I found when I saw this in the theater first time, I didn't know anything about it going in. I hadn't even watched a trailer. And like, I thought her dancing was like, I was like, man, this is super hot. But the second time I watched it, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty like in the territory of Little Miss Sunshine, kind of.
That's what I think is kind of amazing about it. And I mean, as a dancer, I'm super into just the use of dance in any kind of film, and especially this kind of weird Euro, I would say queer aesthetic of dancing. I think it isn't unlike Little Miss Sunshine. I think there is a kind of Euro art dance aesthetic that's going on. She's sexy and not sexy. She's, using the tropes of sexiness. I don't think, Chad, you're always the research king on these things. That I do not think the actress is a professional dancer.
She's not a professional in any way.
Anything.
Yeah, she's never been an actress. She wasn't a dancer. Any of that. So all of it, she was picked basically for being androgynous enough. Like it was interesting. Her androgyny is more like a consequence of like what has to happen in the film. Like the believability of her passing as the boy,
right?
Rather than like I wanted like a fierce androgyne or something like that. So I think it's a bold choice to pick this person for this role with no experience in any of this shit.
Absolutely. I mean, I think she really carries it off. I think she's really fascinating. I mean, Mark and I had a little bit of a difference of opinion about that, but I think she's fascinating to watch. I think she actually has a really, really fascinating face. I love that she's not quote unquote hot, and that we have this character, the signifiers of this character at the beginning are kind of queer, mullet wearing, fashiony, Teaches of Peaches kind of hotness.
I had a note here that says she looks like Peaches and Klaus Kinski had a child.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good.
That is not wrong. That is not wrong. And then she just goes into, and they really like Nosferatu her out for the second half for sure.
Yeah, when we were at that party the other night, I heard quite a few people say they thought this movie was like so bad it's good. I couldn't find anything technically really bad about it. Like the cinematography is great, the acting is great. There's nothing like Nicolas Cage bad about it. Or at least in my
Nicolas
opinion.
Cage is amazing. What?
Well, you know what I mean. Like he'll be in a
I do
bad
not
movie.
know what you mean.
He will always be great in whatever he's in,
Yeah.
but there will be a certain schockiness to many of his movies.
I think it's an intentional Mandy badness.
But what's bad? Like I've been thinking about this a lot. Like what is it that's like to me when somebody says it's bad, that implies a certain sort of ineptness. Like you might not enjoy it. It might not be your cup of tea. Like the flame wrap on the Cadillac is not my cup of tea, for example.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's like things in the film have an aesthetic that people don't like, is what it is. Like the male circuit party gabber dancing with the firemen. Like it's just, they're like too handsome for the people who would watch this movie or something.
I think the thing is that this movie is clearly made masterfully. Everything just seems so considered and so well executed according to some sort of vision. But I've been thinking a lot lately about the way that this new golden age of television functions, where, Chad, you and I have had a lot of conversations about how horror movies lately they all look good and sound good. Mm-hmm. And so it's harder to really know that actually it sucks. Do you know what I mean? Like the technical proficiency that it has brought to horror cinema, even mediocre horror cinema at this point, is way above where it was, say, in the 80s, right? And I think that this golden age of television is very similar, where, pick any show that people, quote, love. Not shows that people are like super fucking into, but people are like, oh, you got to check out Yellow Jackets or something like that, so which I quite liked. But the acting's great, the cinematography is great, the location scouting is great. It flows effortlessly from one scene to another, from one episode to another, but it doesn't accumulate into any amazing artistic statement necessarily.
Reminds me of these restaurants that are really expensive to open and they have a hot chef and they're like closed in 18 months.
It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
No, it's totally. Although that can happen for, like a location reason, as opposed to this golden age of television where there's all this like, there's so many great TV shows we can't keep up. And like, actually, they're not great. They just seem great because everybody involved in it is super fucking talented and there's a lot of money being applied towards this art. But it's not actually that great. It's like all TV has been elevated, but it doesn't actually make the end result of all of these shows better. It's just not as shitty as it used to be.
Totally.
And I guess what I'm rambling towards is that I'm not saying that Titane is like this golden age of television, but the aesthetics are so elevated that for me, I find it might be easy to sort of like cast onto this movie things that it does not possess, because it is, again, it's so well made, but in the service of what? And I think it does have flaws, like the chaotic, multi-layered ways we have to suspend our disbelief for every single moment of this film. I'm just going to be really negative about this movie, hopefully not too relentlessly in this one way. Like right off the bat, she's a mediocre dancer at best. She's kind of bizarre looking, and she has people who she has so many fans that she doesn't even have time to sign all the autographs. That's how like amazing a dancer, performer, hot woman she is. No, she's not. Also, and I think that spins down the line in this movie of these things that are like we're supposed to take that because she locked her parents' door that they probably burned in a fire. There's plenty of ways to get out of a house. She pushes down.
I have a point of technical on that.
All right.
Yeah.
She kills a guy by pushing a stool down on his face. The easiest thing about not being killed by a stool is you just push it out of the way. Like none of the violence is believable. It's all really clunky. And how she kills the really large black guy with a poker. What did she do to him? There was no actual way for her to harm him with a poker behind his back, but he just dies. It just feels like there are these... Oh, also nobody notices she's pregnant, which is preposterous. One of the guys notices that she is a serial killer. Oh my God, it's her. She's that woman who's wanted for being...
That's the least believable thing to me.
And he does nothing.
Her.
And then he doesn't go to the cops.
Right.
He tries to tell his boss and fails, and then lets it go, and it gets him killed. So this movie is just kind of a series of like not very believable things. And I'm not saying that a movie needs to be believable, but all of those things are such different kinds of suspension of disbelief issues that to me it's just messy. I can't sink into this movie, not as an easygoing experience, but I can't sink into the world of this movie because the world is so bafflingly inconsistent in its own logic.
Well, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Well, so my point of order on the house burning, there's a long establishing shot of thick bars on the windows earlier. So that's, that answers that right there, bringing a little bit more verisimilitude to this. Verisimilitude, a word that I learned from the Overlook Theater Bros.
Verisimilitude?
Yeah, it was just a...
Really?
Yeah, I just never heard it before. So
it's a great word.
Anytime I think about it now, I think about Lord Battle. So shout out to Lord Battle and his vocabulary. But the other thing is, I think this film is just completely magically realistic in the way. It reminded me almost of a tranny shack act. Somebody's going to have a car.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a baby that represents love and art. And everything in between is just as messy as it needs to be. Yep. That was kind of my feeling on it. And it's to ask anything logical of a film where a woman sleeps with a late 70s Cadillac lowrider and then has a cyborg baby. Whatever happens in between those two events is a free-for-all to me.
Yeah, that's fair.
I feel the same way. Yeah, and I was thrilled by this because it operates like a weird dance piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I thought about. It was it could be like a show that you put on.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And I don't mean that offensively if you didn't like this movie that much.
No, I mean, I'm thinking about, it's just here's the part where I give a lecture with only using conjunctions. And here's the part where I'm an alien. And here's the part where whatever, fill in the blank. I mean, it's this, it's using the logic of a kind of art form that isn't usually the art form of cinema. Although, of course we know about structuralist film and we know about experimental film, but it's kind of it's pretending to be or masquerading as a narrative film, and it's got some narrative. And I think for me, maybe the flaw is that there's narrative there. It could be less narrative and be more satisfying, whatever. But I kind of accept all the things that are going on. And does cinema need story? I don't think necessarily, but I do think in a way story is always what makes us quote unquote relate to characters. Mm-hmm. And this is an incredible, and then that's what makes us care or don't care, right? So I feel like the character is so incredibly not relatable, not someone we want to, she's an evil sociopath. So I don't even know if she's being posited as the hero.
Well, I think this movie is very similar in a lot of ways to American Psycho, where it is, you're following a sociopath around. You're following around a complete lack of realist logic. The narrative is not quite folding in on itself, but definitely collapses under its own weight. And that's part of it. But there's something about American Psycho that is charming, seductive, like genuinely seductive.
And funny. It's funny.
Well, it's it's so funny. But what's interesting is I think that if you look at Titane, there are a lot of moments that you could go like when she's having sex with the fire truck.
That rejects her.
Yeah. Like that part is, quote, funny, but for a silly movie, this is incredibly humorless. And not that it has to be laugh out loud funny, not that it needs to, while it's being surreal, needs to actually be funny. But it's a pretty humorless movie for how goofball it is.
I mean, it's French. What do you
Fully.
what do you want? You know, I mean,
true.
it's got that, like, it's got a kind of Euro humorlessness and seriousness, unless maybe French people think it's hilarious. I don't know, but
who knows?
Their humor is impenetrable to me. I mean, they elevated flatulists to like supreme like cultural significance in the early 1900s.
Right.
I mean, it's like, yeah. So that sort of thing. I don't even know. Like, you know, I think this might be the episode that we disagree the most on until we cover Scariest 61st,
which I still don't want to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to go kicking and screaming to that episode.
It's going to be awesome. So I think that this movie is really unlike American Psycho, because what Bret Easton Ellis is doing in American Psycho is he's making a character that's supposed to be a stand-in for like a greater culture thing. And like, you know, like Patrick Bateman is all yuppies that work on Wall Street and mergers and acquisitions. And in this film, Alexia is meant to be completely unrelatable and not stand in for anything. And I think that plus the rejection of the 3-act structure, like it has really like unmoored people, and it's also caused people to like bolt their little private grievances onto this film and criticism. And this is where I get really tedious and quote somebody. So there's this one review of this film that I thought was fucking terrible. And it was by this woman named Judy Dry. I think a woman, maybe. I apologize if they're non-binary, for IndieWire. And she said the iconography of transmasculine transition is used as window dressing in this gory fable. The dreaded ace bandage, long out of use, and which appeared most prominently in the controversial film Boys Don't Cry, leaves red lacerations on Alexia's breasts and back. To keep up with his demanding job, Vincent injects his bruised buttocks with steroids every night, flailing, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And she says, Titane twists these milestones of transition, a beautiful and liberating experience for most trans people, making them painful and grotesque. And to me, it's like, if like that's a misread of this film, because it's like those things are not in service to like broader political gender narratives at all. And so I think that's the difference between that American Psycho. I mean, I'm being very tedious with this long thing, but I wanted to get into this like kind of broader idea of how this film was reviewed with people and how like I think it was misreviewed. And it's one thing, you know, everybody has their opinion. You know, they're like assholes. Everybody has them. But I think a lot of the opinions about this film, like Mark's, are wrong.
Well, I think it's a problematic and troubling film. Does that make it bad? No, I think it's resolute. I think it's resolutely. I'm looking for another word. I think it's bodaciously problematic, and it's flirting with this idea. But I don't think this character represents trans people or transness, but she's definitely using transness. She's using a character that is doing transness. I wouldn't call her necessarily a trans character unless she's trans, unless, you know, she's a Haraway-ian cyborg. She's not a Haraway-ian cyborg, though, because Haraway is so joyous in her positing of the cyborg. But, you know, she's Alexia into Adrienne is, I think, more in the service of, and I disagree with you, Chad, that she doesn't represent anything. I think she represents like a masculinist violence and an impulse toward masculinist violence.
The best kind of violence.
The only kind of violence. No, not true.
Yeah. Valerie Solana's shout out.
Although there is a little sliver of like and it's like a really, I mean, it's an ugly, mean film.
Mm-hmm.
And it is using transness in the service of body horror. I don't think that means it's saying transness is body horror, though.
I think she was like very explicit in interviews talking about how she's exploring gender roles. But I think you could explore gender roles without trans. I mean, it's tricky, right? Because the binding thing is certainly an experience a lot of people have, especially like the ace bandage binding, which is, I guess, as to this review or not, I think that happens anymore. But to me, it's like in the story, she gets an ace bandage out of a bathroom first aid kit. So it like makes sense to the story. And then she's wrapping up her pregnancy, which is even a weirder sort of thing. And then
Right. And not really possible.
and then the injuries from it, it's like in Die Hard when John McClane binds his feet up because they've been injured by glass. He's not saying something about like Chinese foot binding. You know what I mean? It's more in service to the actual story. So I guess, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to like, attack like a trans reading of this in any way. I just think that like the film itself is like a bit more opaque than that.
Well, I think you could invert that trans reading too, and like that person is objecting to the content as being some sort of like anti-trans gesture.
Like they see it as like a personal attack, which I think is like kind of a goofy read.
Right, but you could just invert it and invert the same perspective of the content and get something else out of it and go like, yes, when you don't have the support and embrace of trans identities, when someone is left to their own devices and left to cope with, like, let's say, even though dysphoria is not happening in this movie, at least that's not on the table, that they're going to injure themselves, that there is a better way than going alone. You know what I mean? I think that's a perfectly legitimate reading of how this character operates in the modalities of being in transition. Yeah. And it's in support of what this movie could be saying about it.
She sort of like rejects though any sort of like she could be more of a celebrity in that weird like Eyes Wide Shut car show, and she rejects that. She rejects the friendship of the real world house that she murders.
Right.
Like, I mean, it just seems like a real world house to me. It has weird decoration and there's like a Benetton ad of people in there, I thought the chair murder was great, like in the way that like schlocky horror murders.
I like that she sits on it after she kills him. Like, I know that
was so silly.
But
I loved it.
That was one of the parts about the movie that I genuinely liked, is like murder someone with the stool and then sit on it while you think about what you're going to do next. But like
that was a part that really felt like a contemporary dance piece. Like, what do you do with this stool? How about this? Also, how about this?
Yeah.
What were you saying, Mark?
Oh no, just getting there just felt really clunky, and it didn't have to. Like we have 100 years of cinema to look at to how to depict violence. It doesn't have to be ways that bodies don't actually work.
I felt it was like a little bit Clockwork Orangey in the way that there's like music and dance and murder all mixed together, and then like
that's true.
Like who gets killed with a dick sculpture?
Yeah,
like
that's pretty surreal too.
Yeah. There's something about that I thought was interesting.
Oh, that had to have been a reference. I mean, she doesn't talk about it, and I'm seeing, so many references in this film that I just don't think it's as sort of bad and horrible as, some of our friends the other night were saying. But I don't think it's good for trans people, this movie. But I don't think it's hateful toward trans people.
I just don't think it even, like, the hatefulness would be the fact that it's just using these things. I mean, I guess you could say irresponsibly, but towards like you have to be responsible to everybody, at all times for everything. And, you could say that, hey, gender is such a big deal in this movie. And but she's also really, like, her whole thing about like, this film doesn't need to answer any questions or it doesn't need to stand for anything. It's just, it's art. Like, she has a very David Lynchian sort of approach to this, except for she does, like when David Lynch, when some tedious interviewer is like, here's my theory on blah, 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 blah. He'll just go, no, and then move on. And then that's it. She like does something different where she plays like a yes and game where they'll say, like, one interviewer, this like neckbeard, was kind of like, oh, I think this represents, Titans, the birth of Titan. And she's like, well, yes, that. And then she explains how the baby could be a Titan birth from these older gods. But then she walks out her whole Jesus, Mary, Joseph sort of interpretation of the virgin birth, or like the birth, this thing that like the car is like some sort of like God and it impregnates her. And then the fireman is like a Joseph character. So it's like she's very playful with people's interpretations. And then the IndieWire interview with Sharon Stone, I don't know if you guys watched that. I thought it was very, very interesting. because Sharon Stone has her whole read where she comes to it from like a, her experience with it is as a fucked over successful white actress. And she's like, that Cadillac has been fucking me for years. And, like all this, and it's like, and then she goes on to describe it like filmmaking, essentially like working in a factory. She's like, it breaks your back. It makes your legs hurt. It makes your soul hurt. It's like, lady, I think the juice was worth the squeeze.
That's
in
so
your
interesting.
career.
Well, and so Uma might have that read too. I mean, I think it's interesting to look at these, the kind of symbolics of it and how people might read that. I love the yes and. I love an artist who brings the yes and in and an artist who answers cockamamie reads with a yes and. I just think, that's, again, it's a way that Americans don't love to read art, especially film. Americans want it to make sense. We want it to have a narrative, to have a story arc, to have the 3-act structure, to satisfy us. And this movie is not satisfying. I mean, I think it delivers a lot, but it's not satisfying. It's not, no one's good, no one's nice. I mean, the moment when she leaves that woman on the bus, or when Alexia as Adrienne leaves that woman on the bus, Mark and I are just like, no sisterhood here. And that also just serves to be like, fuck you, you're not going to like this character. Just when you thought you might want to like this character, nope, you don't get to.
Yeah, it's like an American audience wants the bus fight scene from Nobody.
Right.
But that doesn't happen, And I think, as unrealistic as this film is in certain ways, I think it's very realistic with her abilities to violence. Like when she's like fighting her father, he doesn't she has no chance of like killing him unless she gets the drop on him.
Right. In that way that it does the thing that films, like wonderful films like Fury Road do, where it's like you really believe Charlize Theron could do everything she does in that movie. I mean, she's a badass, but in this movie, I do think there's a way in which the violence it's ludicrous, but I do believe that this character is doing everything she's doing. But also something that just occurred to me this morning is once she's Adrienne, she's not violent anymore.
Not at all, yeah.
She can't kill her daddy with her little chopstick. She physically can't do it. And why is that? What is that about? And so I feel like there's something embedded in, and that's where maybe there's some kind of like redemptive trans narrative, or I don't know. I don't even want to introduce that. Like there isn't. And if I were a trans person, especially a trans man seeing this film, I'd probably be furious. Or maybe I don't know. No one is a monolith. Maybe some love it, some don't. But yeah, I realized she does all her killing when she's a lady.
She actually saves somebody's life with the Macarena. Not only is she not killing anymore, she brings somebody back from the dead.
Although, interestingly, her daddy kills to protect her identity. But speaking of symbols, and you guys were talking about them open, this one is not. The character called Conscience, you can call me Conscience, and then he kills his conscience. That sucks.
I watched that scene like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And it's completely unclear if he kills him. Like, it's very unclear. Like, because...
Oh, he's dead.
No, that he dies for sure, I think. But, like, whether or not he intends to kill him, I don't know.
Really?
Yeah. Like, so I thought about this a few times. Like, and here are my 2... You could certainly, like, think that. Like, it definitely seems to... Like, something happens and that character's not around anymore. But the 2 things that made me think about it, he's carrying something that's really heavy, and he showed himself in physical decline. So he hands it. It might have made sense to hand that over to the younger fireman as sort of an acknowledgement of like passing the torch, literally. It blows him up. And the other thing is he's really fucked up when it goes off. Like his face mask is all blown up. So he obviously wasn't too far from him. So like you would think if you gave him a bomb, you would run. But like he's obviously close enough to that guy to take damage. That's the kind of thing that made me think it was on the fence a little bit.
Well, okay.
But he also says, I would kill anyone, even myself, for you.
Right.
So
and nonetheless, even if we're taking it as symbolic, even if it's an accidental death, it's still like daddy killed his conscience in order to make this emotional leap.
And I think that's fine. Like, I think you would do horrible things for people you love.
Oh, totally. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the literal there's a character named Conscience, and he kills him. And that's this transition about what he's willing to do. Like, really, you had to name the character Conscience. Like, that's the... Okay, great. He couldn't be named Frederic or something like that.
Right.
He had to be named the most fucking on-the-nose hokey.
But there's nothing else on the nose in this movie. Like,
Do you
really.
think some people might name their kids Conscience? Like some,
I thought that was his
people
nickname.
are named.
He was named something else, and he's like, I think
they call me. Yeah.
they call me, or you can call me. I could swear that's what happened.
Right.
Whatever.
Can I bring something up, which is that just also occurred to me that almost every single other character in this movie, besides Alexia, her real dad, her daddy, the first woman she gets it on with, and her first kill are people of color. Like every other person who speaks in this film is a person of color. And I feel like there is some kind of embedded message about like white colonialism.
I feel like I need to know more about like France's race situation in the moment to even have anything to say.
Good.
Not good at the moment. Yeah, a lot of nationalistic keeping out of refugees, and then their colonialist history is pretty terrible. But I feel like there are a lot of like colonized people among the firefighters and among her kills in the house. That feels like a texture to me that, like, again, maybe she's not making a big, deep, discernible statement about it, but it feels very notable that, like, and then I feel like there's something about, with her Jesus stuff, when daddy says, this is my son and you respect my son, he's bringing in just like among these very skilled firefighters, he's bringing in this person who doesn't know shit about anything and is like, you'll respect him and you'll include him. And that feels like just white mediocrity and white nepotism. It's like coming into another culture. And I thought that was kind of slick and good. Yeah. And that was a real comment on like masculinist mediocrity and like dudes be given their sons jobs.
Yeah, he has that monologue where he's like, I'm God to you.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, really it's right in there.
Affirms what you're saying there. And then that's also kind of the New Testament. Like, it's like how the story goes. Yeah, I mean, I thought it's interesting too that like how like to a person every single firefighter is like super handsome.
Oh yeah.
Like, and it's
that's actually just true. Like that's the way it is.
I love one of my favorite lines in The Departed is at the very beginning where they're playing rugby against the fire department and Matt Damon is being like super shitty. And he's like, yeah, first time in the history of pussy that firemen are getting pussy. There's just like this like hateful Bostonian banter that he has against the firemen, which I think is pretty hilarious.
Yeah. No, I thought that was really, really intentional. And I mean, and it is this kind of totally I think there's so much, Mark and I were talking about this in preparation, but a lot of queer aesthetics in this film, from having her kind of styled to look like Peaches, not Peaches Christ, our friend of the pod, but Peaches as in the Teaches of Peaches, mullet wearing queer girl, queer, a kind of
satin jacket,
odd queer hotness.
Yeah. And
then just like, the gay fantasia of the firefighters' dance party.
One of my favorite scenes is in the dance party is maybe my favorite scene in the whole movie.
So good.
When she's doing her weird striptease dance. It's not really, she's not taking anything off, but she's doing her
dance.
Yeah, she's doing her sexy dance. I love how varied the expressions of the firemen are. Like some people are like horrified, some are confused, a few are clearly aroused. Like I just love the diversity of expression in that crowd. That pan, that
two are kind of wrapped as if she's an angel from heaven.
Yeah. And some of them are like, is this even an option? Like for this dancing.
Right.
Yeah.
I also like this sort of weird trance that the two guys who carry her
and
put her
weird.
up on top of that was as a dancer. It was like, they're in a dance state right now. They're not in an acting state. They're not in a character state. I felt like there was a lot of there's a technique pioneered by this choreographer called state work, and maybe it was started by a theater person, but I felt like there was a lot of state work in this film, that there were a lot of states and textures, not just story and acting. And that was satisfying. And that was a moment where they're kind of eyes rolled in the back of their heads, and like, why are they picking Adrienne up and putting him, them up on top of the thing? Like, it's this trance state that speaks to their work in a sense too, that they're doing their work in a physical way. I mean, a firefighter, I do not want to say a firefighter is like a dancer, but it's this immediacy. There's this immediacy and this physical work that's involved. So the way that they're letting off steam in this sort of trance state is very interesting.
I just rewatched, I don't know why, but I just rewatched Jarhead last night.
I was going to bring this up.
Really?
Yeah.
That movie?
Yeah, Jarhead.
I just watched it last night.
Yeah, and the documentary Restrepo for the exact same reasons you're about to say.
There are a lot of scenes of sort of exploring the sexuality inherent in extremely homosocial situations. So there are all these scenes of like Marines with their shirts off, dancing ecstatically, whether it's at night around a fire or they're just joking around and pretending to be gay, but mostly it's about them just like being in their bodies and being among other men, and the ecstasy inherent in that space. And it's shot to be sort of like, on the inside, it is the straightest thing in the world. Like, and that's how that space operates, right? It is so straight that you can be shirtless and grinding around with other male bodies, and there's no homo in it. But if you are on the outside looking at it, it's a circuit party.
Right. It's a total gay fantasy.
It's like jiu-jitsu. It's exactly the same.
It's exactly
right.
like
Well,
jiu-jitsu.
and hello, your jiu-jitsu studio is where all the gays on Folsom Street pause and gaze through that window. I mean,
Why wouldn't you?
why wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, like the dance scene in Jarhead, like the Christmas dance scene.
Yeah.
You see, like there's a similar scene in Restrepo, which is about it's a documentary about a forward operating base in Afghanistan, I believe, that Younger did. And you can just go on YouTube and type in Marines dancing. It's just it's this primal, ecstatic war god thing that people do. You even see it in a little bit. If you've seen the HBO series Generation Kill,
No.
there's a few actual Marines that they have in the film, and one of them is this guy Rudy Reyes, who's this Adonis. He's a fucking specimen, and like there's a lot. They call him Fruity Rudy because he's like kind of like, it's the time of metrosexual, so he has a skincare regime that he's still doing in Afghanistan, but he's also the most badass out of all of them. He's like the fastest, the meanest, best martial artist, and it's just like there's all this running commentary on his like beauty and achievements that is like certainly is homoerotic, but it's also like they're so confident in that they're just there to deal death that it's not an issue for them. It's just an interesting dynamic, I think, that like a lot of people probably would not be totally aware of.
Oh, sure. But also in this movie is the scene where the dad, in a way to sort of bond with his son,
Are you saying the daddy or the dad?
Daddy.
Daddy. I think her dad is her dad, but this is daddy is daddy.
I'll use your parlance.
Yeah.
Daddy, to appeal to his son, his missing son, puts on that Argent Zombies song and starts like grinding with his hands up in the air as a way of like, hey son, come dance with me, and is like grinding his hips in the air, and it's amazing. It is not how we dance with our son.
No. Well, this again, so I feel like the firemen, and P.S., we talked about this too, like firemen, what little boy doesn't want to be a fireman? So it's like you've got this sort of firemen as the pinnacle of what every little boy wants to be, and then fireman as the pinnacle of what every gay man wants to fuck, and then you have this sort of darker gay. There's so much kind of gay fantasia in this. You have this sort of darker fetishy thing of this daddy boy relationship that we have between the daddy and Adrienne, and his fantasy of the missing son. But like, he knows.
I think he knows right away.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like, like right away. I think he knows that it's not his son, and I think he knows that his son's dead. Like there's that scene later when he sees the burning body. I don't think that the kid died in a fire or anything like that, but I think that's him like realizing like there's this death. And I think that the whole time he's just decided that this new son is his son, and that's fine.
Right. And that he's somehow holding on by a thread in his fantasy that his son is alive, or his play that his son is alive. This is hard to articulate, but I was just thinking about it, because then he also is holding on by a thread to his youth. So he's a person who's living in the past and holding on to youth and holding on to strength and holding on to masculinity, holding on to this kind of slipperiness of being a father and being the daddy and being the god. And it's like playing at this psychosexual game with Alexia as Adrienne allows him to kind of hang on.
In a way that steroids are failing to continue to do in the way that he wants them to.
He just needs to adjust his stack. He's just got something off.
Completely. Totally. Which made me think about, I did dip into this book that a bunch of people were talking about years ago called Testo Junkie by Paul Preciado, Spanish. I think it was first maybe published in France, but it's a Spanish theorist. And it's not a memoir, but it's this kind of chronicle about, at the time, they were Beatrice Preciado and then doing like this chronicle of doing testosterone and kind of recording it. But it's called Testo Junkie, and it's kind of this in a more joyous way than this movie is doing, but it's kind of not pronouncing to be about transness. It's not pronouncing to be about a trans person's wholesome journey. It's about it's called Testo Junkie. It's about getting addicted to testosterone and figuring out what it does. And it's a drug journey. It's a drug chronicle. It's pretty, I'm not finished with it, but it's pretty out there. But I can't imagine that Julia Ducornau did not read Testo Junkie and Cyborg Manifesto. It just feels really in there. Like all this theory feels really in there.
Yeah.
And that's also just something that feels really French about this film, that it's not about satisfying anyone. It's not about telling a satisfying story, but it feels really symbolic and theoretical in this, also this kind of like Freudian Lacanian way.
Yeah, she definitely drops some like I read Judith Butler references in her interviews, like for sure. Like, I mean, you can definitely tell it's in there. The steroid thing is interesting too, because in the film it's just it's a point of abuse, and it's sort of negative, but like the entire like exogenous hormone scene is really changing at the moment. And I think part of it's driven in part by the trans men sort of like since there's more. I remember even just a few years ago talking to a friend of mine who was in transition, and I was really shocked at how often the stack changed. I was like, you would think they would just have this nailed, like you would know like that here's what you should be taking to get this effect, but it was always changing, which I thought was strange. But the more I learned about like TRT and hormones and stuff, it's like you take a certain amount of TRT and then, okay, well that causes this other imbalance here. So you have to take this other thing to, mark that out. Like your balls can shrink. So you can take another chemical to make your balls normal sized if that's a concern of yours. And it's interesting to see more and more people out about their use of these substances, while some people are like lying about it still, like The Rock or any Marvel actor, just not talking about like what it takes to become these like godlike characters. But I mean, I'm for sure getting on all this shit in a few years. I cannot wait.
Oh, Jesus. Well, if we can talk about this in a way that hopefully will deter you from that, I think that in thinking about, this movie delightfully defies genre, but I think one thing that it does rub up against is body horror. There are a lot of elements of what body horror is. I think it has a lot in common with Burroughs. Maybe we can talk more about that later. But ostensibly, it's mostly body horror because we've got this woman with a transformer growing inside her, right? However, as we were just talking about this movie's relationship to transness, I think that there's a potentially clumsy reading of like, well, what is the horror of gender? If we want to think about the ways in which gender is fluid, well, what's the horror to be explored there? I think this film like drifts up against that. But one thing that this movie absolutely does dive into is the horror of aging. Not a lot of movies actually confront aging as a horror. Oftentimes, aged people are horrifying. That's a fucking trope across, half of horror cinema is scary old people. But few movies actually explore the horror of your body decaying, the horror of, being completely invested in, let's say, a certain type of masculine performance. And no matter what you do, you're going to drop off. It will end. And you can compensate for it with pharmaceuticals and hormones, but even that is going to only take you so far because your body is rotting.
Well, I would say Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve, and Death Becomes Her all confront.
I love Death Becomes Her.
Aging, women aging. And I think we wouldn't have to look very far and hard to find other movies that really confront women aging and the horrors of women aging and the glamorous woman aging. But I do think it being about masculinity, what's really interesting is, in seeing some of my friends who are dancers aging and myself being a dancer who's aging, and P.S. as an aging dancer, I now have some titanium parts. I think normal people are kind of allowed to age, but when you're an athlete, you really notice it. You really notice it. It's like one of the few domains where it's like, yeah, you're not going to get better. You're not going to keep getting better. You actually have to accept, if you're an athlete or a ballet dancer, like you accept when you're 18 that you're fucking aging already.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess one difference between what I was saying and what you said, which is totally true, is that those movies you were saying, I guess you could stretch and talk about Death Becomes Her is a body horror.
Yeah, sorry. I guess I wasn't talking about body. Yeah. I stretched it out of the realm of body horror for sure.
No, totally. But perhaps our listeners can weigh in.
The Wrestler is to me like a body horror film.
It is about aging.
With the dancer aging out and he's like wrestling,
you're right.
He's shooting up. To me that like is a great example. But I think you're right. Like, every time you watch a UFC card, somebody's career is ending. Like somebody like the card is like all the fights in a night. Mm-hmm. Like there's somebody on the undercard or something like that who's like has like will be out of the UFC if they lose. So there's something like that happening. You see it in it's also a thing that happens to a lot of normal kids that play sports in high school. Like your senior year of football is very likely the last time you will ever play football again. And so many kids are like totally fucked up from playing that sport. And you're like, oh, like now what? Like I've given a lot of my body to this and then I'll never do it again until I pump out my own unit and make him play football. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, you were in the body horror of aging.
That's all I had for that.
This also touches on Frankenstein, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the shooting and the characterization of Alexia as Adrienne, like I think she's giving us more Frankenstein's monster than she's giving us Klaus Nomi, really, like in terms of the way her carriage and the way she looks. Like she looks really like, we were talking about this. She's this kind of fierce killing machine, and then she breaks her own nose, which is horrifying, which I couldn't watch either time. And then she turns into kind of this forlorn, traumatized character. And she has the kind of forlornness that Frankenstein's monster has, in a sense.
Yeah,
I don't know, or she's there's something about the way, the forlornness and the traumatizedness that she's telegraphing. You do kind of have empathy for her in some of those moments, and you forget she's done all this brutal, horrible killing,
That's very Frankenstein-y. Like the monster is like a decent character until he's like driven to it, and he's like created to be terrible. So like her father's indifference to her like makes her terrible.
She's like Frankenstein in reverse. Although I don't know. Do you think she's just a bad seed and he hates her? He's already like, maybe she's already a horrible kid and he's just had it with her in the car? Or do you think he's an indifferent, cold, horrible character?
We don't get...
I was thinking about it because it's like, one level you're like, it's like kid freaking out in the backseat, Babadook style. There's that. But then she's making car noises. And it's like a cool racer dad would be like, come up here and make noises while I shift. You know, like, so it's sort of like, is it just her?
She's kicking his chair and won't take no for an answer.
Well, he's making her listen to 16 horsepower, and that's I'm going to drive any woman to the end.
I think that the difference, though, with the Frankenstein analogy or comparison is that the novel Frankenstein gives us a monster with a very deep and rich inner life, a profoundly ethical turmoil.
Yes,
in his heart.
I'm not comparing.
No,
I'm
totally.
not saying she's like him. I'm saying she's kind of telegraphing the feeling. But yes, you are absolutely right. There's no comparison.
But what we're getting with her character is an incredible flatness. It's very pronounced that as soon as she breaks her nose and cuts her hair, she becomes a completely other person. Like her transition is instant, where she goes from being this like aggressive, nasty, violent person to someone who is incredibly withdrawn, can't stand up for herself. And in fact, it's interesting that she goes into this fireman's world trying to pose as someone, and it's very crafted. She's really like, I see an opportunity and I'm going to take it, and that's how I'm going to live on the lam. But she's terrible at it. But she seems to be terrible at it because she can't bring herself to even communicate clearly. Everybody thinks she's weird and suspicious of her. Not because she is failing to do a good job in assimilating into her new role.
As a man.
But rather because she can't even like shake someone's hand and look them in the eye. She just becomes this like broken person.
Broken baby.
Yeah. Which is very weird.
It is.
I just, sorry, I was going to say one thing about your Frankenstein thing. Is like the reason why Frankenstein, the doctor, won't make the monster a mate is because he's worried that they're going to mate and have this super race.
Right.
And that's his specific reason for going back on the deal. And it kind of like Ducornau, the reason why I think you might be right about Frankenstein thing is she in one interview talked about how this child was being born to create a new world. And so I guess there's something there.
She's making a Christ, a Frankenchrist. She's making...
My least favorite Dead Kennedys album.
Exactly. Not to be confused with the Dead Kennedys album. But she's making a kind of Christ myth for Frankenstein, in a sense. I mean, Frankenstein itself is, the modern Prometheus, not so much the Christ myth, although sure. But the other Christ, the other Mary Shelley Frankenstein part of this is Mary Shelley. I did a lot of deep diving and research on Mary Shelley and made a piece about Mary Shelley and Frankenstein in 2002. So if you ever do Frankenstein on Scary Thoughts, I would love to come back and talk about Frankenstein because I have a lot to say about it. But Frankenstein is also it's a pregnancy horror book. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein when she was 19, and by then she had already had like 4 pregnancies and lost 3 of them. Or like lost 2 of the pregnancies and then one baby had died. Like she had a really tough time of like having babies and having them die and almost dying in childbirth. And so I think that there's a lot in this. The body horror of pregnancy is there as well in this.
That book is so much more modern than anything that came out around it. I mean, there's other stuff. You could make an argument for other books.
Slavery. I mean, they were all abolitionists. So at the time that they were writing all that stuff, they were all reading all the stuff about what was going on in the States with slavery and abolition. And so a lot of it, like that metaphor is part of Frankenstein too. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Another thing I really like about that book is it sort of makes a case for fringe knowledge being valuable. So like he like at the very beginning, the doctor is studying all this totally obscure, weird alchemical stuff, which is like rejected by his mentors and teachers. but it's also how he like creates life. And you see a little bit of like that in like the modern, like really fringe, very online weirdo scene. They'll be like, I know everything about 1700s German idealism or whatever.
Right.
And
Or then to the people who are like modern primitive types who are like into trepanning these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
they're just going to weed themselves
Oh
out.
my God, please let them. But also, I mean, back to Testo Junkie too. It's like, this person is using this off label in the service of erotics and art exploration and philosophy, not in the service of becoming a better person or living their best life necessarily, or maybe living their best life, but not in this sort of prescribed neoliberal way.
Yeah, this definitely hasn't talked me out of pinning everything possible in a few years. I mean, do you want to be like Frank Grillo or not?
Who?
Frank Grillo?
No.
He's like a handsome actor. He's in his 50s, kind of like 5% body fat. Living his best life for sure.
How do you know people's body fat?
Because I'm interested in my own body fat percentages, and it's very difficult to judge it without calibers and all that other shit. So you just look at somebody who's like, oh, that guy looks about like how I look. He has whatever. Also, I love this. There's two YouTube guys that I really like. One is this guy, Greg Doucette, who's a bodybuilder from Canada. So he's one of your people.
Yeah.
And his just fitness and workout advice is great. And it's kind of what I've done in quarantine is like live like a prisoner, just books and weightlifting. And I'm not like huge or anything, but like I'm in good shape right now.
Yeah.
And then the other guy who I like is Derek from moreplates.moredates.com, and he's like basically like a storehouse of pharmaceutical knowledge. So if you ever want to know like what Marvel actor is taking what, he'll do like a deep dive into what he thinks they're taking. So it's just this like pop pharmaceutical knowledge that I think is just super interesting. I also like sort of like in the way that you can be an autodidact with your knowledge and education. You can, I think in the future, people are going to be autodidactical about their personal pharmaceutical choices and then more than how they already are with their ketamine and whatnot. But yeah, I'm excited for the future of all this shit. I can't wait till you can mail order all kinds of crazy shit.
See, to me, the only thing that's interesting is that testosterone suppressors seem like the best hope for the future of humanity.
If you want a world of Moby.
Oh, that'll be great. Yes, yes.
World of
I want
Moby.
I want that world. That is a better world.
I want to be able to be useful with picking up furniture and like smashing people if I have to,
Get the nanobots to do it.
Oh, please. That's some Bezos shit.
But isn't Bezos all into body hacking and his body fat
He must
percentage?
be. Like, he looks pretty good for his age. I would say there's actually an episode of moreplates.moredates.com about Bezos' stack and what he thinks he's taking.
Really?
It's kind of interesting. But like, I also feel like if you're like a billionaire, why are you not living like Wesley Snipes and Demolition Man? I mean, like, I just do not understand these like dreary, great. I mean, the reason why I'm dreary and wear a gray t-shirt is because I have no fucking, like I live in the Bay Area and like I don't really have anything to do. But if you were like a billionaire, like, you should be like dressing like an aristocrat from another time.
Totally.
But like a cyberpunk version of it. I mean,
if that's your jam, or you could dress like an 18th century, you could dress like Louis Couture's, like depending on who you are. No, I think people should have way more fun with their clothes.
I think the Russian oligarchs are doing a pretty good job, like with the alligator suits and the supercars.
Ew.
Yeah,
Ew.
ew. I'll second that. Ew.
It's like it's funny. Another thing, this movie is so much about cars in a way.
Yes.
And none of the commentary about the film addresses like everything you look at in a film has some sort of meaning, right? Like, so it's like, what about this choice of this particular car? And, Sharon Stone's really the only person who I heard articulate any sort of read on it. And, like to her, this car would have been the car that somebody in power over her at the early part of her career probably would have driven. And I think it was interesting that she has that experience with it. Like, I mentioned earlier, like that Cadillac's been fucking me. Like it's a great interview. Like
That's
Sharon,
hilarious.
She's really like entered the tough, salty broad part of her career, and I think it's great. And she has this really sad story about how she wanted to make she wanted to make films and be a director, and she was basically told to fuck off by these people. And she really loves Julia Ducornau because she's like, you're doing it for real. And but then I also thought, you're fucking rich. You could make a movie if you wanted to. You know, like go read Rebel without a crew like everybody else did and get your Kevin Smith on. Like you want to make a blockbuster is what you want to make. So
there's that argument about, like, let's say politicians or cops, like the price for entry is so extreme that if you're willing to buy into it, you can't then do good in that position. It just seems like if you're that level of Hollywood star, you've already sacrificed, I don't want to use the metaphor of sacrificed your soul, but you've already bought into a system that you are probably not the person who is in any way likely to do a 180.
right.
There are almost no examples of it because that system weeds out people. Like, it's just inherent in it. It's not like there are gatekeepers who keep those kind of people out. It's that the whole thing is the type of place where people who are, am I making sense? I mean, it sort of reminds me of the Dave Chappelle thing in his last special that actually had nothing to do with ranting against queer people, but where he's talking about Me Too, and he's like, to all you actresses, if all of you just took your money and handed it to some young woman to work on your career, none of this would be an issue, but you're not doing that. And at the 11th hour starts going like, I'm going to make insane shit almost exclusively.
Right.
But those are incredibly rare.
I think they are incredibly rare. And I think it's happening a little more for women, for actresses to pivot and direct.
TV's really opened that door a lot.
Yep.
Yeah. And I guess Maggie Gyllenhaal's film is really great. She just made a film of the Elena Ferrante book that is supposedly amazing. And but I think for someone like Sharon Stone too, yeah, I think you're partly right, Mark, but I bet there are weird gates that she's kept from. I bet a lot of people in Hollywood would love to see her fail and help.
Oh, okay.
If there are people who, like, if Weinstein kept Mira Sorvino from having a career, like, imagine how many people want to keep Sharon Stone from succeeding any more than she already has.
Or just devaluing her value as an actress.
Totally.
Like, say she makes some stinker of a film, it's like, say she makes like a movie that's just terrible and it's like lampooned. Not that she would, but...
Well, I mean, and that happens, you see that oh my God, please don't get me started. Like, you see so many terrible, like, David O. Russell's first movie is terrible. What was the other movie that I couldn't even finish watching? Maybe it was a David O. Russell movie or another. It wasn't Wes Anderson. It was one of those guys' first movies.
Oh, it was about college.
The one, kicking in, the one who did Frances Ha. Yeah, the one who's married to her, who's married to Greta Gerwig. Anyway, it was his first movie. I was just like, oh my God. And so many women, and our friend Maria Magenti couldn't even get her second movie, on Netflix. Like, there are just so many, I feel like lots of women made sort of the mediocre first movie that you make when it's your first movie, and then just nobody let them make a second movie. And so many men made a mediocre first movie and got hailed as the great white hope of movies and got to get better and better and better and better and better. And that's the thing that just makes me furious about the whole Hollywood system.
Yeah, I think all that stuff's real. I think that's an absolutely correct opinion of what happens. I think, though, like, expecting that beast to reform is unrealistic. I think it's just,
I do too.
And so that's like where Bill Burr, I just saw him a couple months ago, and he had this whole thing about, like, women don't support the WNBA, so why should men? And he's like, no one wants to watch this, including women. And so I think it's like, and I think the Chappelle thing, there's something to that too. Like, the women in Hollywood are fucking clearly great and talented. If they just almost did like a general strike sort of situation, what could Hollywood do? Like would they be forced? I mean, we're going to make only war movies with dudes for 6 years or whatever,
Yeah, and
maybe.
And I hope I was somewhat clear about saying, I made the statement that there's not some sort of gatekeeper. I mean, there's not there's plenty of gatekeeping in Hollywood, and a lot of it is insidious and pernicious. But there's not a kind of gatekeeping that keeps people who might in the future make interesting, unique decisions about their career. It's not like those people are prevented from being brought to Hollywood. And I can certainly imagine that if you're Sharon Stone, especially in that generation, that it must have been incredibly dispiriting to have people tell her no go when she, like, you know, she has this prestige but is still being held back.
Yes.
But there's still gates that are closed to her. But it is interesting that we have this incredibly robust, amazing legacy of independent cinema in America, and then there are complaints about gatekeeping. It's like, yes, there's obviously lots of gatekeeping, but if you're Sharon Stone and you have $5 million in the bank, throw 2.5 at it, especially back then, right? $2.5 million is not the worst amount of money for a movie.
Yeah.
Go sink it in a movie, see what happens.
Yeah.
What's the worst that can happen? It
Room.
ends your career.
Right, look over the gate. And I mean, no, there are people like Miranda July. There are people making weird ass shit outside of the system.
Yeah,
But
what's
it-
the
but
guy
it
in the
must-
room's name?
Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah, Tommy. I mean, that's a dude who was like, I want to make a movie, and I'm going to use my weird Romanian money to make it happen.
Yeah.
And like, so I think that like, if you really want it, you're not going to get stopped. And so I think for Sharon, I could imagine this, like the reason why I am probably not ever going to write a book is I can make 10 times as much money copywriting. So she's like, fuck, am I going to take 2 years out of my life to make this movie that no one might see and I might not even believe in myself to make, who knows, right?
Right.
Or I can just go make like $12 million on this thriller. You know,
Right.
that's a tough call.
Sure.
It is a tough call when you have a lot of boats to pay off and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you want the boat. That's the point.
You can't take it with you, babe.
You can ride it to Valhalla. In flames.
When thinking about this movie, I sort of felt like William S. Burroughs' some of his work, like even Naked Lunch, is sort of the closest analog.
Yeah.
Speaking of like masculinist aesthetics and queer, and then
And junkies.
and junkies, totally. But it's this weird sort of like, it's kind of sci-fi and it's kind of surrealist and it's definitely abject and non-linear. I feel like there's some sort of, can't say template. There's not much of a template from Burroughs, but
There's a through line, I think, because his shit is so like 1930s detective. And the aesthetic of neon, which is really present in this film, is from like noir 30s stories. Like it gets brought into, that's why it's in Blade Runner so heavily, is it's
Right.
making this sort of like futuristic thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's there. The needles, for sure.
Yes.
You know, any transgressive sex act, for sure.
Right. And this sort of main character is this sort of, I don't know if Burroughs really has anti-heroes, this kind of empty cipher of a character.
I can kind of see that with some of Burroughs's protagonists.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you say they're all ciphers in a way?
I'm not a Burroughs queen.
A Burroughs queen. God, is there a single one of those?
Daniel Coffey.
I don't think that.
Is totally.
I don't think Daniel Coffey would call himself a Burroughs queen.
See. Oh, I know. We need to talk about the mom of the missing kid. The way the whole movie just becomes a totally different movie when baby mommy
Oh, yeah.
comes over.
Yeah. That's
She's amazing.
Awesome.
Like, I want to watch a whole movie starring her,
Yeah.
first of all, because I thought she was incredible.
that's the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead moment in this movie. Like,
Yeah.
I'm interested in her.
Yeah, and that also felt really intentional, that it's just a totally different movie.
I thought that
She's
too.
like calling the bullshit. She almost comes in to call bullshit on the whole movie.
Yeah.
So
Like, she's calling bullshit on the fantasy, but she's also like, I'm in a different movie. I'm coming in from a movie that makes sense to be like, y'all are, I don't know what you're doing.
I
here.
thought there was a very like Greek chorus aspect to that character, and this is one of the things. She's dressed in the black leather jacket that Julia Ducornau wore throughout her entire press run on Raw. So I thought, like, if you were really, really reaching, you might see that this is sort of almost like a stand-in for like, almost like in a Looney Tunes cartoon when the brush comes on the screen and starts changing things around. Like that, it kind of gave that vibe to me.
She's the grounding force. This sort of pulling the curtain back force. Yeah,
if anybody's going to blow
the paintbrush.
Yeah, if anybody's going to blow the spot up, that's her. And then she just is basically like, have at it.
Right, and I just love when she just looks at Alexia Adrian and it's just like, what have you gotten yourself into, kid? I don't know what. Girl, what are you doing?
Yeah, and at that point, she's in like full Gollum
Totally.
face. You know, like just
leaking oil.
Just creeping around with her weird belly and shaved head.
Totally.
Speaking of her weird body, you notice at the very end, you know how there's that the very tender scene where he's like shaving her, like, I'll make it grow.
We're gonna make it grow.
At the very end, she has like the peach fuzz mustache. Yeah.
Yep.
Super
I didn't
subtle.
catch that.
Yeah.
I noticed that. Yeah.
Either that or the Dirty Sanchez, one of the two.
Oh my God. You're worse than a drag queen.
I feel like I really missed out by not being more involved in Tranny Shack.
Everybody really did. Yeah, everybody really did. That's the thesis of my book, Faux Queen, A Life in Drag by Monique Jenkinson. Get it at a bookstore near you.
It's kind of, I mean, there's like that documentary or whatever, but it's kind of like the only real, like, I mean, I think that's one of the things I think is so great about that Jane Goodall of drag thing is it's not just like you're out there looking at primates. It's like primates in a very specific time and place. That was,
Right.
You know?
Of which I am one. Of which I am one.
Kind of more of a Dances with Wolves sort of thing, really.
Oh my God.
Or The Last Samurai, or
Same thing. That's Japanese Dances with Wolves.
yeah.
Oh my God. Dances with Wolves.
I sort of viewed this movie that like Get Out as to Raw as Us is to this movie. Debut movie, really simple, tight, perfect, amazing. Second movie, big ol' fucking, like ambitious big ol' fucking mess.
Right. Super theoretical, lots of ideas.
Too much happening. It's like encumbered by its ambition.
Allegories, ambitions, myths.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting. I'll take that. I'll allow it.
Thank you, Monique.
You're welcome.
Chad? No. All right.
Flag. 10-yard penalty. Did we haven't talked about the origin of this story, which I think is really interesting.
Which is what?
So Julia Ducornau had a recurring nightmare where she was giving birth to machine parts.
Oh.
And so that's one of the things I think about. It's interesting when, like David Lynch, a lot of his ideas don't really, he says they don't come from dreams, but then he talks about all these dreams he's had where he had these ideas. You know, like I had a dream about an ear in a field, and then, you know, he works back from there. And so she sort of like works the script back from there in the way that he has like the image of the ear that becomes Blue Velvet. So she's like, okay, well, where did these car parts that I'm birthing come from? And she's like, oh, obviously there has to be a car somewhere, a paternal car. You know, and then this like pushes you into like the territory of like Jungian analysis, which I think is sort of the astrology of psychology. But I think the read on this is like, he's like, oh, here's an artist giving birth to like mechanistic pieces of something. And then I thought about like this film, its messiness is sort of like a refusal to assemble those things into a normal machine. It's like my terrible Jungian dream analysis of what she was saying. But those are the worst analysis, I think. But I thought it was interesting that she worked backwards from that.
Right.
Yeah. How would we get to a woman giving birth to machine parts?
Jet ski, maybe. Do you think this movie would have been different if she had been impregnated by a jet ski?
Shit.
Been more fun.
Probably.
That would be like the porn version.
Yeah.
Not that this wasn't the porn version of itself.
There needs to be a porn parody of this movie.
Oh my God. I'm sure there is plenty of porn of people getting fucked by cars, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, one of the
if
earliest.
there's Pilates porn, there's definitely.
If there's Pilates porn, there's porn about everything. Lots of porn about lots of everything. Fucking cars, duh.
So I would say, so this makes one thing we didn't talk about that everybody else seems to talk about is like this movie's relationship to the movie Crash. And I think like people really do have sex with cars. There was a video I think I sent you of a guy talking about all the cars he's had sex with. And that's like a condition. It's called objectophilia, just a sexual arousal by objects. And I think one of the things that people get wrong with Crash is in Crash, they're not attracted to cars. They're attracted to the accidents that they create. And that's like I have it written down here. It's a symphorophilia, which is like a sexual arousal of an orchestrated disaster, which I think could be sexual arousal for this film also, since it's an orchestrated disaster, I guess.
That you could be sexually attracted to this film.
Okay, if you guys were going to make a variation of this movie that was about a female protagonist getting impregnated by a different object, what would it be?
A different machine.
Not even a machine.
Oh, object, that's too broad.
No, it's not.
Ice cream machine at McDonald's.
Great.
It's always broken. Maybe the child could bring order to the universe.
Yep.
Mark?
No, I don't know. I just asked this.
Synthesizer.
No, not at all.
That's how you get Billy Idol's Cyberpunk album.
Oh, God.
No, it's just Gary Newman, right?
Sure.
Yeah, having sex with synthesizers.
Ballard and synthesizers, sure.
Right. I don't know. I've never read Crash.
It's great.
It's good. It's a good book.
I
really
know,
well written.
I really, people love it.
Total page turner, actually.
I'm reading High Rise right now. His other book, J.G.
that's
Ballard.
So
Ballard.
fucking, I like it better than Crash by a far.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
It's great.
It feels. I guess there's a movie that came out a couple years ago with Benedict Cumberbatch and has a Clint Mansell soundtrack. Which, all those elements make me want to see it.
The book is infinitely better than the movie. Not in a, like, the book's better than the movie. It really is. The movie is really, really good, but it's not, it's its own thing. It's cool. I liked it.
It made me wonder if, like, the yuppie condo stuff from Fight Club was at all inspired by it. Like, I can't imagine Chuck Palahniuk hadn't read some
Sure.
J.G. Ballard, just because he's so interested in transgressive literature.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this would be very Matthew Barney. Like, someone getting impregnated by, like, a Noguchi sculpture. Or, like...
That's funny.
Yeah. Or a Noguchi coffee table. Literally fuck your Noguchi coffee table. And get knocked up.
Oh, my God. I think, okay, like synthesizer aside, but like, what if it was like a piano? Like there's this thing in your body that's like making music. It's like, it's its own, it is an instrument, but its source of musicality is innate. It's not expressing the music of a culture or a movement or music it's heard before. It just is music.
This is back to the French flatulists. Using their body as an instrument.
Absolument.
Is there a movie about that guy?
Well, a friend, someone I went to school with made a fake documentary called Le Petit Man, and it's about trying to trace the history of this.
I feel like some of our less cultured listeners might not know what we're talking about.
Go.
Well, I mean, you probably know more about it being French and ethnicity. But there was a guy who just farted in really hilarious ways, made songs, did impressions of people, and he
could control it.
Yeah, he could control it. He could make any sound he wanted with his butt. And he was the talk of Paris. Like it was
Montparnasse.
he was super famous, right? Like
But it's also possible he never existed, and it's all just
It's possibly apocryphal.
yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really disappointing.
Actually, it makes me feel much better. Believing that the world never actually had such a thing.
I can't believe that might not be real. That is really disappointing to me.
Do we still have that movie?
I have it on VHS, yeah.
Le Petit Man?
Yeah. You got a VCR?
No, I will. Yeah.
It's really great. The fake documentary is super, super fun and really, really well done.
Fake documentaries are always good.
It's true.
Always.
When are they not good?
I don't know.
Yeah. Is Ducornau a mum?
I looked that up and I could not find any information one way or the other.
Yeah.
Like I thought that would be a really interesting question to ask.
Yeah.
I didn't see whether or not she was. What do you think happens to this kid, this baby? as it grows up.
Becomes the Terminator.
Hopefully.
Kinda.
I mean, isn't that kind of... I do feel like we've got hints of Rosemary's Baby for sure.
So this is like something I would say is my only real complaint with the film is I think they should have done the Rosemary's Baby at the end and not shown the baby. I think the effect on the baby was the only really like weak piece.
We don't see its face, though.
You've seen the side of its head.
The glowing spine is a little hokey.
Yes.
I kind of... There's something about the spine. I mean, again, as a dancer, I like that we don't see the face, but we see the spine. Also, like, what do we make of the sort of origin story of Alexia and the crash, right? She gets her titanium, implant. That also tends to, like, ring when she's kind of doing violence. It does a, like, kind of tinnitus thing. But do we think that this is like the origin of her violence? I mean, this is kind of, it's posited that way in the movie, but I don't know. And I'm not going to any big point. It's just, that feels like a kind of square reading of the movie, and maybe neither here nor there. But
I mean, it's the name of the movie.
Right.
Right. So it feels like it's pretty important.
Right.
So I think you're right to think about it. But she's very obscure with it, I think.
yes.
Probably intentionally. So
Yes.
I mean, it's also the first major piece of like body horror too is in the film is like the surgery, which is really gnarly.
I think we watched this movie like a couple weeks before I was going into surgery, and I did not watch that part. I could barely, I don't think, I watched a little more of it this time, but I could not.
I mean, everything that's gruesome in this film is really effective. Like you're like, oh, like for all of it, like the home abortion is really gnarly. The nose breaking you mentioned earlier.
The attempt, the pulling of the nipple rings too. Mm-hmm. And that, the first time around was just like, she's just being an asshole. And the second time around, of course she's being an asshole, but I noticed it was like, oh, she's attracted to the metal. Like the metal, the presence of the metal makes her go crazy, is what I gathered with the nipple rings.
And that girl is the girl from Raw, right?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, she's the actress
Yes.
from Raw.
Oh. Yeah, when she broke her nose, I actually the first time I saw it and realized what she was about to do, I was thinking, I hope she doesn't get it the first try. I hope she has to try several times. And I was right.
You monster.
Or the funny one is she's like punches herself a couple times, and it's like that's
No, I was
Yeah,
watching
yeah.
her do that, and I was like, it's not going to work.
Yeah, you can't.
You got to take it up a notch.
I can't even think of it's really effective. I can't think about
It's
that.
hard.
I can't think about
It's
it.
really hard.
Yeah, I've broken my nose, but not that badly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can see like I have a bump on my nose from jiu-jitsu.
From
yeah.
jiu-jitsu?
Yeah,
God damn it.
Yeah.
Against someone's skull or the floor.
somebody's knee. I just like kind of dove in on it like a moron and
Yeah.
ate a knee. And it was I didn't even really know it was broken until a doctor told me it was broken later when I went in for another jiu-jitsu injury. So he's like, oh, your nose has been broken. I was like, oh, I guess that's what that bump is.
Yeah.
Shit.
So this movie reminds me, I think I brought this up on a previous episode. Just remember our old roommate pointed out to us, we were talking about Silence of the Lambs, which at the time had not come out that long before.
Right.
But he did something like, oh, you like Silence of the Lambs? Describe the plot to me.
Yes.
And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, okay, so there's this serial killer who's keeping women in the basement and he's plumping them up and then skinning them alive to make a dress. And the only person who knows about it is this cannibal genius who's locked away. And so they send this FBI trainee who's the only one that he'll talk to, and like he sort of outlines the plot, and it's like, oh yeah, that is fucking crazy,
Dumb.
spurious, dumb. And this movie is kind of like a 5-year-old making up a bedtime story. Like there's a dog and he flies, but also he has a brother who's made of flowers, and the flowers come from the moon. And like this movie is totally like that. It's like, so there's this girl, she's in a car accident and she gets a titanium plate in her head, and then she becomes a hoochie-coo car show dancer, and then she has sex with the car and it gets her pregnant, and then she kills people with a chopstick, and then
And a stool.
and then she has to go into hiding. So she pretends she's this missing boy, and then the dad pretends that he believes that it's her son, and then he falls in love with his son, and then she gives birth to a Transformer baby, and it's all just like a little too bananas if you lay it out what really actually happened in this movie.
It's like when you let like a really hot girl give you a tarot reading and you tolerate it because you want to sleep with her.
Yes, we all know exactly what that's like.
Yeah, 90s goth.
I paid for tarot readings. I think it's a good divinatory tool.
You got to treat tarot readings like drugs. Like, just as long as you don't pay for it, it's fine.
Oh my God.
I think of them as like a solo D&D game mixed with psychology.
It's like they're a good poetic framework for talking about things. And I think that it's a nice way to, like, you know, instead of just like, oh, I'm going to talk to my friend about my relationship, or I'm going to talk to my friend about my career. It's like you pull some cards, something's on your mind, and it creates this kind of like, it creates another way in. I don't know. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the artwork on it. I especially like the Etsy tarot scene, like, because there's so many different cool variations. And it's interesting to see people who seem to take it very seriously and try to maintain the integrity of the symbolism.
Totally.
And then there's some people who are just like, what else, whatever, there's going to be sheep on all of these. Like, and I mean, both are cool. I think that the Aleister Crowley Thoth deck art has been going around as an exhibit that people can go see.
The original artwork?
Yeah,
far
because
out.
he had some woman that he exploited do all of
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
those.
he did
I can't
not.
remember.
He did not paint those.
I can't remember her name, of course. We were on the drag name thread, though. We were like,
Wait, explain that.
right. So some friends and I, for 5 years, 3 friends and I, Kevin Clark, friend of the pod, Bobby Barber, and Daniel Filipkowski have been on a text thread going back and forth all day long, every day with drag names. And one of them was Ryder Waite and Coleman Smith, where, yeah, those would be really good.
Yeah, that's really good.
Those are, you know, the OG tarot deck. But now I can't remember the name of the woman who did Crowley's deck. Oh, well.
Yeah. Have you seen that they did like a kind of a more feminist redo of the Rider Waite deck, but it's like a slight tweak to it?
I may have seen it. I've seen a lot of the tweaks of the decks.
Yeah, I like the Crowley deck because it feels the most sinister to me.
It's
for some
cool.
reason.
It's a little bit sinister, but
It's also very dynamic.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening on each card. You can
Yeah.
pull a lot from it, whereas a lot of decks, like, let's be honest, making a deck of cards is a lot of work, and most of them don't go the distance that the Crowley deck does in creating like a rich source of, listen to me, I don't even give a shit.
you're so you hippie.
Yeah.
No, I got very into this podcast called Fortune's Wheelhouse by these 2 tarot specialists, and they go in deep, and there's sort of half of it you don't even, because they go into like the Hebrew symbolism of all the Kabbalah meanings of everything, and then making, you know, jokes about it, but they're like, oh, and you know, and one of them has this kind of Chicago accent, so she's like, well, that's Hode, and that means, you know, they're just making all these nerdy in jokes about the symbolism in the tarot. It's very sweet, but they always do a read of the Rider Waite, Coleman Smith, and the Thoth, and then one of them made a tarot deck, and they talk about it, so it's pretty fun.
Cool.
Mythological, your dose of mythological brainiac deep dive.
I have a deck. I guess it's not a tarot deck. It's like an oracle deck. I guess if it breaks from the major minor arcana, that's the difference. It's called the Literary Witches.
Oh,
Oracle.
I have the Literary Witches book. I don't know if
it's the deck that goes with it. So it's
great.
Katie Horan is the artist, and her work is great. And those things. That's who did those paintings.
The artwork that's behind me?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Behind Mark is a very beautiful rendering of Mary Shelley and one of Octavia Butler by
Yay.
Katie Horan.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Katie.
Okay, so what have we learned? Okay, I'll go.
You go.
Thanks, guys. So this reminds me of, I'm coming at this movie aside from not having liked it, I feel that there's a way in which it doesn't work. Like there's part of me that understands like, yeah, it just didn't work for me. And that has nothing to do with the work. That's just me. It's not my film, and decoding why that's the case is kind of hard to do. But there's part of me that thinks like, nah, this movie just doesn't work that well. And it sort of reminds me of, okay, I don't want to name names, so this might be clunky. We know somebody who became a musician and started making music. And I thought it was just dreadful, like really not good music. And I got into an argument with a very good friend of mine where they were going, no, it's not bad music. They're sort of redefining aesthetics. And the music is obviously very smart. A lot goes into it. It's very politically astute. But the music itself is like terrible. And I got into this argument with my friend. My friend was like trying to position it as not bad music, but that it is music that is redefining what music is. And it just seemed like such the argument was not working for me. It just seemed like an attempt to save something that was bad, and I think, it's a good try, right? Something sucks and you want to defend it. You go like, it's about that. It's redefining what is good art anyway. And like, it's such a tired question, but at the same time, I feel that about this movie it's like, it's playing by its own rules very nobly. I think it's amazing the way it is refusing to adhere to a lot of things like narrative, like protagonists that you can joyfully follow along and things like that. But I don't think it actually works. Yeah.
I don't think it has to work. I mean, I think maybe that's one of the what have we learned for me, although it's not, it's something I already knew. Sorry.
Ew.
That's so mean. No. But it's the what have we it's the thing. No, it is the thing one learns time and time again, or a thing I learn time and time again, or have to keep reminding myself of is, does it have to work? It's art. It's not, as my dear teacher Terry O'Connor taught us in an amazing choreographic workshop. It's choreography. It doesn't have to. We're not building architecture. It doesn't have to be structurally sound. It doesn't have to. We can build stairs that lead to nowhere and doors that open to walls and weird things that fall over. So I think, I don't know whether it works. I'm not that interested in whether it works. I mean, I get it though. I get what you're saying, and somehow it just doesn't land with you, or it doesn't. And I don't even know if this lands with me. I don't ever want to see this movie again. But I mean, there are also some movies that are loved. Like, I've only seen The Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover once, and it's kind of one of my favorites. And I don't think I ever want to see it again or need to see it again.
I feel that way about Irreversible.
Yeah, I will never see Irreversible.
Yeah, you don't want to see it.
But so I guess working, whether it works, I think learning that things can be multiplicitous and strange is something I keep learning over and over. But also, just be cool. Don't leave the lady on the bus.
Not cool. Alexia. Ugh. Chet, what movie do you love and never want to see again? Do you have anything like that?
Triumph of the Will. Just kidding.
Although I was thinking about this really amazing documentary I saw. It's something like The Terrible, Wonderful Life of Leni Riefenstahl about her. And just, she's horrible. And also, I was talking about a friend who is just a robust person who, probably will die doing something athletic in their 90s, and I was thinking about that, just think she, lied about her age when she was 80 something so she could get her scuba certification so she could make a film. I think that's kind of, I mean, the Nazi part's hard to swallow, but
yeah, it's a hard film choice. But what was the actual question?
Oh, just like one of Monique's favorite films is A Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. She doesn't actually want to re-experience having to sit through it again. That's how I feel about Irreversible. It's such a brutal, horrifying film. I don't want to re-experience that, but I think it's incredible.
So my film like that is Steve McQueen's Le Mans. which is it's a racing movie, and it takes place it's like in the Le Mans, and he plays a race car driver. He's racing like a Gulf Porsche, and it is a totally beautiful movie. Like it is just an amazing feat of cinematography. There's pretty much no dialogue in it at all. It's just him steely-eyed behind the wheel of this fucking gorgeous like 60s race car. And it's long as fuck. It's boring as shit. Like if you're not really into watching like period like race car stuff. I remember watching it. It was very hard to get. And when I saw it, like, and then my buddy, who actually Tim George, a listener of the show, he showed it to us. We broke into like, none of us had a TV, so we like went and snuck into like this college like area where they had TVs, and we sat and watched it one night. It was just, it felt fun because we were not supposed to be in there. But that movie is, it's like a beautiful movie that I never want to see. And it's actually the movie I think the Brown Bunny is the most related to. Because like the long racing scenes and the nothing happening, but there is no blowjob at the end of Le Mans. I think it would be much improved by it.
Everything is.
Maybe Le Mans and Titane would be a good double feature. Like a car themed.
I think that like any of the Fast and Furious movies would be better. Because ultimately those films and this film are about family.
Well, no, totally.
Totally. But yeah, and actually something I forgot to say, the queerness of this film also is the sort of killing, and this is where it feels very Freudian and very French in this way of like symbolism and stuff. She literally kills her, or we are maybe to assume she lights her family ablaze, her mother and father, her birth parents, and goes and finds another family and kind of finds her place, or at least kind of finds a place to have this unconventional family that she's about to start. And that's a very queer thing also, right? Not to literally kill your family, but the symbolism of it is queer. She finds her place and, stops acting out violently.
Yeah. I mean, I brought up, when we rewatched it last night, I brought up Fast and Furious as well. Because, I mean, there are similarities between this movie and the Fast and Furious movies, other than family and cars. It's also, it seems that the suspension of disbelief question is a real issue for the Fast and Furious movies, but it seems like most people are totally willing to get on board it nonetheless. And like you guys are for this movie in a way that I'm not. The Fast and Furious movies and Titane, like, don't make a damn bit of sense, right? You're on board or you're not, but trying to make sense of it is to sort of miss the point. I think that's something that's true of the Fast and Furious movies. If you're looking for realism, if you're looking for how the world actually works, you're not going to find it here because it's not about that. It's about affect.
Yes.
And this movie is too. Well, in a very different way.
Yes, I love that. I love how you put that. And that, in a way, is what I was trying to say earlier about what have we learned to try and make sense of it is to miss the point. I love that.
Is that it? Are we done with this movie?
Yeah.
I think so.
Write us at WHATTHE at scarythoughts.org about anything you like, but in particular, to write us questions for our post-quarantine Q&A. Questions can be about damn near anything. We'll take it all in. It can be horror movie recommendations. It can be how you spent the last 2 years. It can be about my delightful Canadian diction.
I got one via text today.
Good.
I think we should share now just to give an idea of the scope.
Oh,
the
okay.
question was like whether or not either of us had ever had a coffee enema.
Okay, we'll
answer it on the show.
We will address.
Who asked that?
My buddy Grant.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks for writing in. And then episode 100, we're going to do What Have We Learned, which is kind of a 100 episodes of Scary Thoughts. And we'll probably do an apologia. I've been listening back to episodes and trying to cull things that I got wrong. Mostly I end up with things that Chad got wrong, but there's no point in my digging into that reservoir. And then after that, we're going to do recursive horror. So if you want to be on board for that, go watch things like Triangle or Happy Death Day or Groundhog Day. Or
When I Fall?
Or When I Fall. It's not really horror, but it's definitely in the family.
Totally.
Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. Anyway, time loops.
And for the record, the
go.
people are on my side.
Of what?
About everything.
Jesus.
Also, friend of the pod, Kevin, is obsessed with your Louisiana cadence. It's like the way Chad says on.
Oh, yeah.
The people are on your side.
Is that from Louisiana?
I don't know. I don't
I'm sorry. Louisiana. I want to pronounce it like your people.
Good place, Greg. Especially the people of New Orleans or whatever the fuck people say. I don't know what my accent would be. I don't really sound like people down there, but there's a lot of variation in how people sound down there. So,
Yeah. Okay. Buy Monique's book,
Buy my
Faux
book.
Queen, Faux space Queen. Especially on Amazon, where you can contribute to the Jeff Bezos economy.
Buy it at your local.
Thanks for listening.